Those of you who have been following me for some time are familiar with what a demographic pyramid looks like, how it goes in and out based on birth rates over the ages. The boomers are the largest generation we've ever had. They're there in green, nice, big, chunky group. Their participation in the workforce has dominated what we consider normal since the 1960s when they started entering the workforce. So we had a huge labor oversupply because of them in the 60s and 70s. And then we had a huge consumption boom in the 70s and 80s because they were all coming of age at the same time. Now they're leaving the workforce in the 2020s, and we're going to be facing a profound labor shortage. But it's not just about them anymore. Their children, the millennials, are a very different cohort in many ways. But because they're a large generation, they are dominating what we think of as normal right now. Now, there are pros and cons to this, of course. Everyone has their favorite millennial stereotype that they're lazy, that they're entitled, that they got their first job at 27, that they think they're going to be CEO in 3 years, that their mom still drives them to work, assuming they show up, they sleep until 11. All these things are totally true for about half the millennials. About half the millennials do match the stereotype, and they are an issue. There's no question about that. But the other half do not match the stereotype. The other half did everything that they were supposed to. They entered the workforce immediately upon leaving college. They never took an extended adolescence, and they've worked their fingers to the bone. But from a worker quality point of view, these two different groups of millennials are actually pretty similar, because the millennials who did everything right got screwed. They were coming of age, they were entering the workforce just as the 2008 to 2009 financial crisis hit, which meant that they were the last people in the door, so they were the first people who got fired. And they lost several years of prime, constructive work experience that you normally get at the beginning of your career. They missed out on that for like 3, 4, 5 years. At the same time that the lazy millennials were missing out on 3, 4, 5 years of work experience by choice. So regardless of how you look at it, the millennials today are behind compared to every generation in the workforce that has come before. They've missed out on up to a half a decade of formative work learning, which means they will never catch up. They will always be behind compared to the generations that have come before. Now, there are a lot of them. They are by far the largest group in the workforce today, and thank God they're there. Otherwise, the retiring boomers would generate a pressure that I don't know how we would deal with. So they are contributing, but they're contributing on the back foot, and they will always be like that. Now, there's some other characteristics about the millennials that are worth discussing. Unlike the boomers, and especially unlike Gen X, the millennials have a reputation accurately for being very collaborative. So if there's any sort of work experience that requires multiple fingers in it, especially across multiple fields, the millennials are very good at integrating their diverse life experiences, their diverse work experiences, to contribute to a single product. And in the point in the American economic evolution that we are in today, this is great news, because we are seeing the fastest industrialization process going on in this country that we ever have, even faster than World War II. Part of it's the shale revolution that have pushed down energy costs. Part of it is the millennials themselves, which are now the largest consuming cohort in the world. Part of it is deglobalization, which is bringing manufacturing back. But if you take a group of people like the millennials, who are good at people skills, good at management, good at sharing and contributing, in a time of change, this is exactly what we need. And the only downside about the millennials in this form is that they're not a little bit older. So they're not in senior management, but they can make things work in a dynamic, fluid environment and not get stressed out about it. And that's fantastic. The next generation down are the Zoomers, or Gen Z. These are the kids of Gen X, and they have a wildly different approach to everything compared to the millennials. First and most important is the difference in attitude towards everything, towards people, towards the workforce, towards their jobs. The millennials are willing to job hop. They're not loyal. But Zoomers were raised by Gen X, and Gen X raised their kids with the general idea that you will never get anything from the government. We will always be outvoted by the larger generations, the millennials and the boomers. So you will never get Social Security. You will never get Medicare. You will never get Medicaid. And so there is no point to collaborating with your peers because there isn't going to be enough to go around. You don't simply need to be better than them. You need to be better than everyone. And that generates a radically different work ethic. Unlike millennials who job hop, Zoomers are desperate for an anchor. And so they will cut a deal with their employer to stay on forever, so long as they have a leg up on everyone else. They're hyper competitive. This makes them very productive as members of the workforce writ large, but it also sends them in a couple different directions. First of all, when you're hyper competitive, you don't want to be in a position where your outcomes are dependent upon someone else. So you don't work well with others. They're fairly antisocial, and the sort of mass touchy-feely work that the millennials are capable of and competent at and famous for, the Zoomers just can't compete in that field. So anything that requires a team effort, management, blue-collar work, construction, they just don't do. They just want to lock themselves in a closet and code, which means this next generation cannot contribute to the sort of labor shortages that we're seeing right now in trucking, in agriculture, in upper management, in finance. They're just not part of that scene whatsoever.